On July 4th, writer-director James Gunn sat down with the Sunday Times and claimed that Superman is the story of America, because the hero is, quote, an immigrant that came from other places and populated the country. And cue the shitstorm.
I don't want to hear about politics and morality from Hollywood directors.
We don't go to the movie theater to be lectured to.
Look, don't try and make it all woke and crazy.
A few days later, Gunn's brother doubled down.
Yes, Superman is an immigrant, and if you don't like that, then you're not American.
Then when the film hit theaters, the immigrant angle was suddenly overshadowed by a different interpretation, one that, to some, was glaring.
If you think this movie pulls punches from criticizing Israel, it does not. But straightforwardly, it is the most obvious, Israel thing I've ever seen in my whole life.
According to Gunn, however, that resemblance is purely coincidental, as the film was written way before the recent mess in the Middle East. But does that make Hassan wrong? Can the artists dictate the meaning of their work? What if Gunn says it's about immigrants and kindness, but seeing a highly advanced military dominating an impoverished desert country strikes you more strongly? Then what's more important, the artist's intent or the cultural climate the film emerges into? Has politics infected what's supposed to be a universal story about justice and the fight for good? Or is a universal story about justice and the fight for good unavoidably political? Well, as someone who spends way too much time analyzing movies, these are the questions I live for, and there's never been a more chaotic and fascinating time to ask them. Did that Sydney Sweeney ad promote eugenics even if the ad execs had no such agenda? Does the fact that Superman is arguably the most iconic symbol of virtue in American pop culture give his actions inherent political meaning? Or is it all just projecting? I guess what we ultimately have to ask is, what does it even mean for a work of art to have meaning? Well, to find out, we're gonna have to take a close look at the Man of Steel's latest adventure, talk about the cultural moment as identified by Happy Gilmore 2, and revisit one of the most legendary moments of Humphrey Bogart's legendary career. Let's dive in. But first, a quick recap of the movie. 3 years into his superhero gig, Superman finds himself under fire for stepping into an international conflict. Apparently, the US allied Baravia has invaded the neighboring country of Jarhanpur, and Superman's intervention halted the conflict before spiraling into a crisis. Wounded from a battle with the Hammer of Baravia, aka Ultraman, Superman is rescued by Krypto, who hauls him back to the Fortress of Solitude, where he heals up while listening to the incomplete message his parents sent him to Earth with. Lex Luthor unleashes a towering kaiju to keep Superman busy, while he and his cronies break into the Fortress of Solitude. There, they recover the complete message from Kal-El's parents, which reveals their true intent for their son to conquer Earth. Luthor broadcasts the message to all the world, and public opinion turns sharply against Superman, who willingly submits himself to the authorities, giving Lex the opportunity to imprison him in a pocket universe. With the help of Metamorpho, Lois, and members of the Justice Gang, they escape and take the fight directly to Luthor. Turns out, Lex orchestrated the Baravian conflict so he could split Jarhanpur's territory with the Baravians and get the green light from the government to kill Superman. Superman defeats Ultraman, the Justice Gang repels the Baravian invasion, and Luthor is arrested. Back at the fortress, Superman takes comfort, not in the words of his birth parents, but by the warm memories of his human upbringing with the Kents. The end. Okay, let's start with the first controversial reading, that Superman is a story of immigration. Yes, Superman is not from Earth. Yes, he's a sort of refugee because Krypton was destroyed. Yes, people, particularly Luthor, distrust him because of his alien origins, and maybe he derives a sense of right and wrong from his history of displacement. But beyond these broad strokes, the parallels to the American immigrant experience are, in my opinion, quite thin. At the end, Superman affirms that he's just as human as everyone else because he's flawed, but tries his best every day.
I'm as human as anyone. I love, I get scared, I wake up every morning and despite not knowing what to do, I put one foot in front of the other and I try to make the best choices I can. I screw up all the time, but that is being human.
I think what Gunn is going for here is that universal human qualities like love and fear are the core of Superman's identity, just as they are for all humans, despite their origins. Problem is, Superman possesses some decidedly non-universal qualities too, like the ability to dominate the whole planet, which turns out his parents explicitly wanted him to do. So it's hard to say that people skeptical of Superman are drawing from the same biases as people skeptical of immigrants. Now, these real-life analogies don't have to map perfectly perfectly onto the story, that's fine. Art can work in loose metaphor, but when the artist asks us to consider the film through a particular political lens, it naturally invites closer scrutiny. And when you do follow this metaphor to its endpoint, things get decidedly not woke, because the film's take on immigration is, if anything, center-right and doesn't warrant conservative outrage. Superman rejects his birth parents' directive, stops using their message as a source of comfort, and instead embraces the guidance and identity of his Earth parents. In short, he assimilates. He adopts the values of his adopted home and discards the values of his native culture. Not exactly a woke position on immigration. Either way, the controversy seems less about what the film actually says and more about the optics of attaching a politically charged label to one of America's most enduring pop culture symbols, especially these days. The second one, the one that I think has a lot more textual evidence, is that the Baravia-Jarhanpur storyline mirrors and takes a moral stance on the current Middle East conflict. Let's break it down. Baravia is portrayed as a highly advanced military power with drones, airstrikes, surveillance tech, the works. Check. They launch an offensive on Jarhanpur, a fictional, impoverished desert region with inferior defense capabilities. Check. The production design of Jarhanpur resembles stereotypical Middle Eastern aesthetics. Check. Baravia is an official ally of the United States, while Jarhanpur has no official relationship with them.
Siding with a nation, Jarhanpur, which historically has not been a friend to
Jarhanpur
the US,
has
against a nation that's technically our ally.
Check. Baravia holds their liberating people from tyranny.
The Baravian government maintains they're freeing the Jarhanpurians from a tyrannical regime.
Yes, but
There's growing skepticisms towards Baravia's intent.
because you know as well as I do that the Baravian government is not well-intentioned.
And the US military-industrial complex, backed by Lex, is providing Baravia with free weapons. Check. Then it's revealed that the Liberation Campaign is really a land grab, with Baravia planning to split the territory with Luther. And while I'm only half serious about this, I can't help but think about this AI video Trump retweeted, which to this day, I don't know if it was a troll or not. I don't even have to draw the comparison, the similarity is obvious enough. Again, Gunn has denounced this reading, but, and this is pure speculation, if I had to guess, he originally conceived it as a commentary on Ukraine that he wrapped in Middle East coding to make the parallel less on the nose, only for that to then backfire when the Middle East took a turn for the worse. Again, just a guess, but either way, when a work of fiction so closely evokes real events, whether by design or coincidence, can we responsibly say it conveys that meaning? Well, to answer that, we need to take a step back and look more broadly at the mechanics of meaning making in media. What does it actually mean to say a work produces meaning? And what qualifies a particular interpretation as valid? So let's dive into some of the frameworks for understanding how art creates meaning. The first framework is the most straightforward, or what I'll call the intentional artist.
It doesn't take long to see that the comet is a metaphor for climate change, with the world split between believers and skeptics.
Here, the artist has an idea, perhaps a political opinion, and consciously infuses it into the film, fully aware that they're playing a kind of game of Inception. If they can tell an emotionally arousing story that parallels a political event or worldview, they can communicate and promote these ideas. If we take Gunn at his word and assume he's not being disingenuous, then through this lens, Superman is not about the Middle East, but it is about immigration, though I don't know about how successfully. The second framework is what I'll call the unconscious ideologue. Here, the writer isn't consciously trying to make a political point, but their worldview, shaped by culture, environment, and upbringing, unconsciously steers their creative choices. Through this lens, we can hypothesize that James Gunn was overwhelmed by a political position. Maybe it was the Middle East or Ukraine, and when he auditioned different plot lines in his head, the ones that aligned with these events resonated most strongly, and thus they were implemented into the movie. Even if the political angle wasn't deliberate, it still produces that meaning because it reflects the biases and preoccupations embedded in the creator's worldview. But I tend to stay away from this kind of analysis because, at best, it flirts with armchair psychoanalyzing someone I've never met, and at worst, it crosses into outright mind reading. The third is what I'll call capturing the cultural mood. See, storytellers are a lot like songwriters. Yeah, they both have to master structure and craft, but so much of what makes a great artist is their creative intuition, a sense of what feels right, and what feels right changes based on the times. James Gunn has to essentially lick his finger and put it to the wind to discern what will resonate with audiences. We can assume that after years of a brooding Superman, Gunn intuited that there was an appetite for a lighter take on the character because he, like all of us, is soaked in the cultural mood, and that cultural mood can also carry political meaning. Because Superman is such a loaded symbol, any attempt to depict him as good inevitably draws on the culture's, or at least part of the culture's, current moral compass, and that compass is the same one that guides us in deciding who is right in real-world conflicts. That's why, even if the Baravia storyline wasn't intended as a Middle East allegory, it still lands in that register, because audiences navigate the story with the same ethical framework they use to navigate the IRL conflict. And that's the key. A film can create political meaning not because the artist set out to make a statement, but because the cultural mood that defines heroism in fiction also shapes how we judge morality in real life. You can see this same mechanism at play in the recent spike of comedy villains modeled after tech moguls in the vein of Mark Zuckerberg or Elon Musk, hyper-focused on disruption and blind to the harm it causes. In Megan 2.0, spoilers by the way, the antagonist starts as the misanthropic tech billionaire Alton Appleton, then eventually shifts to the eerily calm tech guru Christian who kills innocents to sway media coverage and uses a neural implant to enslave people. In Happy Gilmore 2, Benny Safdie plays a foul-breathed tech bro who wants to disrupt golf by making it more brain rot friendly, and in the Naked Gun reboot, Danny Huston plays another rich tech dude who wants to advance humanity by thinning out the inferior sheeple, leaving only the quote best people standing. Now, were these characters chosen to advance an anti-tech agenda? Probably not. It's more about choosing a villain archetype that resonates with audiences who are increasingly skeptical about the benevolence of tech companies. But either way, it carries the same message. The last framework, the one that guides most of my work, is what I'll call the artist-theorist shared project. It's basically the idea that mapping political ideas and social theory onto narrative entertainment is valid because they're fundamentally engaged in a similar endeavor. Artists and political theorists, whether they realize it or not, are in a similar business, building models of reality to explore what drives people, how society shapes those drives, and the values that emerge from this dynamic. The theorist abstracts these forces into concepts and arguments, the artist embodies them in characters and plots. A great theorist exposes the hidden machinery of the world, a great storyteller dramatizes that machinery. And oftentimes, storytelling exposes a truth decades before theory catches up. For example, consider the most enduring concept from pioneering psychoanalyst Jacques Lacan, objet petit a. In short, Lacan argued that desire is never truly about the object, it's about that which obscures the object. Desire is stimulated by what hides the object. Think of one of these, a Kinder Surprise egg which you can't even get in the States. It's a chocolate with a toy inside of it. Now imagine that this toy was on the shelf of a toy store. No child would want it because it's too lame. But if you wrap it in chocolate and hide it from view, then suddenly the mystery makes it irresistible. If you remove the barrier, the desire collapses. Now, did Lacan come up with this concept? Or was it John Huston? Almost 20 years before Lacan formalized objet petit a, Huston and Humphrey Bogart dramatized it in The Maltese Falcon. I was lucky enough to see this in theaters last year, 5 stars all day on my Letterboxd. So good. The film follows Detective Sam Spade and a crew of criminals chasing the titular jewel-encrusted statue. After betrayals, murders, and narrow escapes, they finally get it, only to discover it's a worthless fake. For a moment, they're crushed. Then, almost without missing a beat, they compose themselves and resolve to keep chasing it. In the film's final moments, when asked what the statue is, Bogart delivers one of the most iconic lines in cinema history.
The stuff that dreams are made of. Huh?
It's tempting to read this as romantic, that dreams are grand and shiny like the real Falcon, but that's not quite it. It's that dreams aren't about possession, they're about the chase, the thing that lays between you and the object. In that way, the fake Maltese Falcon is made of dreams far more than the real one could ever be. So, who originated the idea? Was it Lacan or Houston? The answer is both and neither. They were simply working in the same territory, each interrogating the human condition through their own medium. And that's why art is inherently political, not because it preaches, but because it interprets. Art and theory are both acts of framing reality to reveal the underlying forces that shape how we live and think. In that sense, Superman, by attempting to depict truth, justice, and the good in a world shaped by troll farms, the military-industrial complex, and endless wars, cannot help but carry political meaning. Now, these frameworks are by no means an exhaustive list of how meaning emerges without intent, but it's a good starting point. However, if you asked me, does everything have to be political? The answer would be no. You don't have to engage with art on a political level in order to appreciate it, and you certainly don't have to engage with such meanings in order to understand it. They're there if you want to dig them up. But I will say there's more pressure to investigate these meanings than ever before, because in our current media landscape, commentary on media has become as much a part of media culture as the media itself, and interpretation is a lucrative part of the spectacle. About a year ago, I made a video in collaboration with Professor Hans-Georg Müller, whose work is heavily influenced by sociologist Niklas Luhmann's concept of second-order observation. Luhmann argued that with the shift to modernity, we pivoted away from observing things directly and started observing how other people observe them. Think of it like a Yelp review. It doesn't matter if the restaurant looks good to you, it matters much more how it's already been evaluated by others. Platform economies have turbocharged this phenomenon. Now media delivers messages about how messages are interpreted, and now audiences consume each other's consumption of content. So, while art has always carried political meaning, the political life of a piece of media today is pushed to the forefront like never before. Algorithms and platform incentives shape which interpretations rise to prominence, and those interpretations tend to be the ones that gin up the most emotions. The nature of art hasn't necessarily changed, but the way we engage with it has, and that shift inevitably changes how we understand it. You know, I actually quite admire how Gunn handled this whole debacle. Once the uproar began, it would have been all too easy for him to retreat into semantics to avoid pissing off half the country, but he didn't. He didn't pull a Green Lantern.
I'm a Green Lantern, lady. That means I took a vow not to get involved in politics.
Oh, that's part of the vow.
While he insists that kindness, not specific policies, are the backbone of the movie, he recognized that if you want to make a film that speaks to the problems of the present, it's gonna have political meaning, and there's no reason to run from it. Unlike, for example, Christopher Nolan. Anthropologist David Graeber once argued that Nolan's insistence that The Dark Knight Rises wasn't political was disingenuous, and I tend to agree. Even if Nolan didn't intend to evoke the Occupy Wall Street movement, he still had to know that making a film about class resentment and political uprising right in the wake of the most publicized class-based protest in decades would strike political chords. Clarifying your intent is fine, pretending the work has no political dimension at all is, well, disappointing. Superman is a fascinating entry in a recent trend of films that seem aware of their existence in a world where it's impossible to control the meaning you create. Last year, Joker 2 grappled with the irony of telling a story about a character whose image takes on political weight beyond his intentions, only for that story itself to take on political weight beyond the director's intentions. Check out my video on Joker 2, by the way. I'm quite proud of it. Similarly, now with Superman, it seems as if the movie faces the same struggle as its protagonist. It struggles to manage its meaning. Superman tries to stand in for what's right and what's good.
Results of you seemingly acting as a representative of the United States
I wasn't representing anybody except for me
around the world, more
myself,
than a war that lasted between 12 and 24 hours.
But for both Superman and Gunn, representing the good, especially if you want to do so in a way that's relevant, is always going to be political. So just own it, and hope that maybe the angry talking heads learn what Clark does about his parents' message.
What you wanted that message to mean says a whole lot more about you than what anyone meant for it to mean.
Hey, y'all, thanks for watching. Don't forget to check out my Ko-fi page if you want to donate and support the channel. Be sure to subscribe, because South Park season is still going strong, and my next movie analysis will be on weapons. I appreciate you all, and I'll catch you next time. Peace.